Um, all right, new legislation. I will also say I'm just going to give this forewarning. One, for the purposes of today's new legislation talk, I'm largely focusing on just certain pieces of legislation and certain pieces of that legislation that are applicable to you. Do you know you have a new legislation talk from SBOA? And as many of you know, there's often some overlap between DLGF and SBOA. So on certain things, I've deferred to SBOA, and I'll let Lori cover that during her talk. On other things, we are working on starting our onslaught of legislative memos. So you should start to see those coming through our DLGF listserv. Again, good reason to be on the listserv if you are not already on it. But just to give you a little bit of background on what my last month has looked like, I've been very involved in the implementation of new legislation. It just happens to be new legislation that has to do with two particular school corporations. So while I have done some work on getting myself all up to speed on the new legislation, and I hope that I'm up to speed enough to be able to present this all to you, certainly if you have more detailed questions, I'm probably going to have to dig in further with our legal team to get those questions resolved. All right, so let's jump in. For the most part, I'm going to go numerically. So we are going to start first with Senate Enrolled Act 310. This particular legislation pertains to counties where you may have an established land bank. There are two new options provided for those counties. The first one is to provide a deduction on the assessed value of real estate that was transferred from your land bank. The county council has the ability to create this new deduction. The deduction would be allowed for 5 years from the time of the transfer on, and the deduction can be at least 25%, but not more than 50% of the assessed value of that property. If your county council is interested in implementing this deduction, there is a requirement to do a public hearing. And prior to that public hearing, you do have to give 21-day notice to any taxing units that may be impacted by this deduction. If your county does go through this process to create this new deduction, we certainly would ask that you let the DLGF know so we can track that. But administratively on your side, the taxpayer does not have to file anything in order to actually claim this deduction. So what will happen is that your land bank is actually responsible for filing a report with the county auditor before February 1st to notify you of the properties that have transferred. And then you would be responsible for actually applying the deduction to those particular owners. The county auditor is also responsible for preparing a report of the properties that are in the land bank report that are still owned by the person to whom that property was originally transferred. So I said there were two options available. The deduction is one. Another option that's available to counties that have a land bank would be that your county council can establish the option to allocate a portion of the property tax revenue from the transfer of the property to the land bank. You can allocate a portion of that property tax revenue back to the entity that did that transfer. So you may have a separate unit or somebody who may own the land initially. They transfer it to the land bank. If your county council has adopted this option, the allocation back to the original owner of that property before it was transferred to the land bank can be at least 25%, but at most 50% of the property tax revenue for that property. And again, in order to establish this option, a public hearing is required with 21-day notice to affected taxing units. The entity that transferred the property to your land bank is responsible for providing a report to the county auditor before February 1st. They need to identify to you which properties were transferred. And then for your part, you would just automatically allocate that property tax revenue back to those transferring entities at the time that you are doing your normal settlement and distributions. Next, then, jumping over to Senate Enrolled Act 386. There are a few different changes that I want to highlight here from 386. I believe Lori also will be talking about some other changes in this particular bill. But one of the first dates is something I alluded to in my opening comments, is the roll date for both real and personal property. That has been changed back to July 1st. So for those of you who have been around for the last few years, you know that historically the roll date for both real and personal was July 1st. Then as we were working to try to get things set up so that you all could certify net assessed values sooner, there was a change made to move the rolling of the real property values to June 1st. That was actually supposed to start this year. And then the personal property roll date was set to June 15th. Again, that was supposed to start officially this year. Because of a different change in 386, which I'll talk about next, it was determined that in order for the county to have the assessed values from the county assessor in the best shape possible, that it would be preferable to move this roll date back to July 1st. So for many of you, this is the date that you've known for many years, and just letting you know that that date is back. This is effective this year. So don't be hounding your county assessor next week saying, why didn't you get this to me on June 1st? They do already have that additional month here for this particular year. One of the other date changes that was included in 386 pertains more to the county treasurer, but certainly will ultimately impact you all as well, so you need to be aware of this. The county treasurer will be required to mail tax bills on or before April 15th, starting next year. Again, for those who have been around, this date kind of continues to change. It used to be that tax bills had to be mailed 10 calendar days, or 15 calendar days, excuse me, before the May 10th property tax due date. A couple of years ago, that changed to 15 business days. So for this particular year, because of the way holidays fall, the official due date for actually mailing tax bills this year was April 19th. In 386, now starting for next year, it will be April 15th for all counties. So it's not a major shift, but especially having gone through this past year and working to track down each of the counties right there at the end, I know that those 4 days do make a major difference for you all. So I would just advise that you start to work now, or maybe not right this second, but fairly soon, start working with your county treasurer and your vendors to kind of outline what that process will be for you, so you will be able to meet this on-time billing due date of April 15th. So I mentioned there were some other changes in 386 that impacted the roll date, and this is the main change. Currently, there is a twofold process by which taxpayers can appeal their change in assessed values. And that particular process is driven by whether or not the county has mailed Form 11s, which is your notice of change in assessed value. For those who mail a Form 11, the taxpayer has 45 days from receipt of that Form 11 to do their appeal. If the Form 11 is not sent, then the tax bill serves as that notice. And again, there's a 45-day period after receipt of the tax bill. One of the concerns that we have heard from the taxpayer side is that this 45-day and whether or not a form was sent ultimately means that it can be fairly difficult to track when those appeal deadlines are throughout different counties. So particularly for those business entities that may own property in multiple counties, they were interested in pursuing a more standard deadline for appeals. So it definitely took a little bit of maneuvering, but this is ultimately where we landed. And this particular change will not start until assessments after December 31st of 2018. So this would be for the January 1st, 2019 pay 2020 year. But starting at that point in time, so in 2019, if your county does mail a Form 11 by or before May 1st of 2019, the deadline to appeal that, based on that assessed value change would be June 15th of 2019, so June 15th of the assessment year. If your county does not mail the Form 11s before May 1st, then the appeal deadline will be June 15th of the tax year, so June 15th, 2020 in this case. So as you are looking at this particular process, there is some time built in here so that each county can determine what's going to work best for you. I know from me personally, I'm always a big fan of when counties send out Form 11s. I think it ultimately helps with your net assessed values. It gives you a better feel for what type of appeal threshold you may need, whether you need to just take up to that 2% AV withholding, or maybe you need a little bit more in certain districts. But with this particular change, you certainly will want to work with all of the different office holders to determine what makes the most sense for your county in terms of sending out Form 11s. One of the things I do just want to highlight with this particular change, and one of the reasons why this change was even possible, is because of the work that has been done on changing the assessment deadlines over the last several years. Kind of an ongoing theme, right? We keep changing deadlines, but we're getting there. And I'm really encouraged actually this year by the work that the county assessors have done. So I do kind of want to give a shout out to them. So many county assessors really stepped up to the plate. This was the first year that they had an official March 1st statutory deadline for providing their ratio study to us. And really just so many assessors stepped up and either met that deadline or very closely met that deadline, to where really by about the start to mid-April, we had 70 plus ratio studies either in process or out the door. So that is a huge change from where we used to be, and we really appreciate all of the work that's gone into that process. Because the assessors have been moving and getting their parts done sooner, that's why this option to provide that Form 11 by May 1st should be much more of a viable option moving forward. All right, I'm going to skip this slide because I like to duplicate slides apparently. And I'm going to switch over to 1043. There's a number of different slides I have here on 1043, but they all pertain to bonding and bonding for particular projects. So we currently have something in statute that's called a controlled project, and many of us have in our head a controlled project is something that is $2 million or more. And essentially what it means is if it's a controlled project, there may be some additional statutory requirements that you have to go through before you can actually bond for that project. So we'll talk through the different thresholds. But while the $2 million threshold for the controlled project has been around for a long time, one of the discussions that took place this past session was that it really hasn't changed over time. It's been $2 million for many, many years now, but as we all know, costs continue to change. And so the decision was made to actually modify where this threshold would be. So for any resolution, ordinance or resolution that you may adopt to either issue bonds or enter into a lease for a controlled project, here in 2017, this $2 million threshold is still your target. But moving into 2018, that is going to change to $5 million. So what that means would be if you are looking to pursue a project and your overall cost is going to be less than $5 million on that project, you will no longer have to potentially go through either the petition remonstrance or referendum processes. Moving forward then after 2018, so that we don't end up with this type of stagnant threshold in statute, the legislation has changed to say that if you were to adopt an ordinance or resolution in 2019 or beyond, that threshold is now going to be based on the prior year threshold multiplied by the assessed value growth quotient. The assessed value growth quotient is the figure that the state budget agency provides to us each year that helps to determine how much you can grow your maximum levies. They provide that information no later than June 30th. For this past year, it was about 3.8% this last year, and we'll be waiting here into the month of June to actually see where it ends up for 2018. Because this threshold is now something that will continue to change, there is an additional requirement for the DLGF, and that is that once the state budget agency has provided us with the assessed value growth quotient, within 60 days we have to publish a notice within the Indiana Register that notifies all local governments of what that new threshold will be. So essentially doing the math of prior year times AVGQ. So for 2019, $5 million with whatever that AVGQ would be determined for 2019. So as I said, we'll have to publish that within 60 days. And for those of you who are sitting here saying, Indiana Register, I don't ever look at the Indiana Register, don't worry. We will send it out on our listserv, and I'm sure it will be posted up on our webpage as well, so that you all do have access to that information. All right. One of the other things, though, that I wanted to highlight, so many of us have in our heads this $2 million threshold as it pertains to bonding for a controlled project. And for most units, that really is the threshold that we look at. But I don't want to talk about this legislation without pointing out that there is actually another possible threshold for units. And so this other possible threshold would be an amount that would be equal to either 1% of your total gross assessed value if your total gross assessed value is more than $100 million, or $1 million if your total assessed value is less than $100 million. So again, most units won't actually end up having this be their threshold because the controlled projects threshold is the lesser of either this current $2 million number or this 1%, $1 million calculation. But I don't want us to just focus only on that one piece of the threshold, because there is a possibility, especially for a smaller unit, that this other part of the calculation may come into play. All right, so for your controlled projects then, we said, all right, if you're doing a project that costs up to this controlled project threshold, you can go ahead and proceed with that project without additional requirements. What happens if you're exceeding either this $2 million threshold or the new $5 million plus threshold? So at that point in time is when you would enter into a petition remonstrance threshold or a calculation. So as of today, if you were to issue a bond, if you had a project that was going to cost somewhere between $2 million and $12 million, that would throw you into a petition remonstrance situation. Meaning, once you go through the process to do your preliminary determinations or to make your statement that you're going to enter into this lease, there is an opportunity for 500 taxpayers to submit a petition to the county to say we want to have a full remonstrance period. If it enters into that remonstrance period, then if those 500 signatures are verified, then you will have a signature drive. And so you will have a petition in favor of the project and you'll have a petition against the project. And both sides of that equation will go out and get as many signatures as they can, bring those petitions back to the county after the appropriate time period. The county will verify the signatures, and whichever side has the most signatures wins. So if you are in this process between the $2 million and the $12 million currently, your taxpayers, while they don't have the ability to actually vote on a ballot, they do have a way to make their voice known, and in some instances, they may have a way to stop that project. In keeping with this theme of updating the various thresholds, it was determined that we also now needed to move the thresholds for petition remonstrance. And so for this case now, I'm talking about the upper threshold. So for that upper threshold, again, here in 2017, it's still going to be $12 million. In 2018, if you adopt an ordinance or resolution in 2018, it will be moved up to $15 million. And then from 2019 and beyond, it will be the prior year multiplied by the assessed value growth quotient. So you're still ending up with the same amount that you're looking at here. So right now you're looking between 2 million and 12 million. And then in 18, you'll move to 5 million and 15 million. And then those numbers will grow by assessed value growth quotient from there on out. So you're still looking at kind of that $10 million pocket there of project cost. Again, the department will be responsible for publishing this new upper threshold for your petition remonstrance in the Indiana Register, and we certainly will make you all aware of it as well. I do want to again just point out this other threshold. It is still applying here, but again, we're going to focus more on the change in the actual thresholds that we all are used to. There are some other process changes for petition remonstrance that you need to be aware of. Whereas right now you have to have one public hearing prior to adopting your preliminary determination or making the decision to enter into bonds. That is going to be changing to 2 public hearings moving forward. This may seem basic, but they did specifically write into statute that you do have to allow public comment at your public hearing. Generally speaking, I think most of us view a public hearing as that opportunity for the taxpayer to come and speak to you, but for whatever reason, they determined we had to have that written in. So you do have to make sure that the public is provided the opportunity to comment. Prior to this public hearing, there is a notice that has to be done, and then there is additional information that you have to have available at the hearing. And there's a whole list of information, which I have not included in here, but I did want to highlight some of the new items. So new requirements that they added would be that you have a calculation of the current and projected annual debt service payments divided by your net assessed value. So this is just for your unit only. The second one would be the sum of all of the debt of all of the units that overlap your unit. So essentially for you county, you're going to be looking at everything within your county. So you're going to sum up all of that debt and divide that by the net assessed value. And then lastly, you also will need to include a projection of your estimated debt service levy and tax rate for 10 years, including roll-off of any debt, roll-off or payment maturity of any debt that you currently have outstanding. This has been a point of contention on a regular basis between the department and especially school corporations as they do capital referenda. They always want to come to us and say, we're going to issue this new referendum, but we've got this other debt falling off, so there's really not going to be that tax impact. But for our purposes, historically, the department has had the position that the taxpayer needs to know just what's going on with this particular bond, because we have no way to guarantee that those bonds that they're saying will roll off, that they will roll off. Perhaps a unit may be looking to add additional debt. So we have not been willing to take that step and kind of recognize the debt roll-off. So I think that's really where this particular item is coming from, is an acknowledgement that oftentimes you are planning your bonding around when other debt is rolling off, and this provides you that opportunity to demonstrate that to your taxpayers. All right, so we had up until $2 million, talking just here in 2017, up to $2 million, go ahead, do your bond. Up to $12 million, potential petition remonstrance. What if it's over $12 million? That's when you enter into the referendum process. So these thresholds that I have here are going to look really similar, except that while these were the maximum thresholds for petition remonstrance, these are now the minimum thresholds for referendum. So if you are going to, here in 2017, you're going to have a project that exceeds a $12 million cost, you would now be looking to move into a referendum situation, and then that threshold will move up as we've discussed over the next few years. All right, same thing here, just with kind of those other thresholds. All right. One other thing, though, that was added that you need to be aware of is that they added in a requirement that we do look at your overall bonding package throughout 365 days. So what this is really designed to address would be a situation where a unit may do a $5 million bond here, maybe a $7 million bond there, and just continue to piece together some of these smaller bonds. They've added in some language that requires us to look at the sum of all of the controlled projects that the unit is entering into within 365 days. And if that sum of the controlled projects is exceeding $25 million, even if your one project that you're currently working on is only, say, $10 million, if you now in total have exceeded $25 million, that moves you into the referendum process automatically. So again, be cognizant of that. It does specifically say in statute 365 days. So that's just kind of something to be aware of as you are working through your bonding package and determining how best to go about implementing capital improvements. Similar to petition remonstrance, we have, for the referendum, you have to hold the two public hearings, you have to allow public comment, and then they also have added in this requirement for the roll-off calculation. One of the other things that changed in 1043 pertains to a petition to the department. And this particular petition already existed, except that the way that it was written into statute provided a pretty major loophole. Essentially, this petition is an opportunity for the taxpayer to say to the department, I believe that this unit is not following these requirements to implement petition remonstrance or referendum. They're dividing a project to make it smaller, and that's how they're avoiding actually taking this to the voters. The loophole that was there, though, was that a taxpayer's ability to send this petition to us was triggered by a unit doing a preliminary determination, which you would not do unless you were doing a controlled project. So you have to do the determination that you're doing a controlled project, which automatically enters you into the petition remonstrance or the referendum processes. But if you're actually trying to avoid these thresholds, you're not doing a project that costs the amount that it would look like it's a controlled project. So we did modify this in order to make this more taxpayer friendly. And essentially now taxpayers have more ability to petition the DLGF. It is now triggered by when the political subdivision gives notice of a decision to issue bonds or enter into a lease agreement. It's not necessarily specific to something that we call a preliminary determination, which is a very legal, technical term pertaining to controlled projects. Even if you are not doing a controlled project, there is still a notice to taxpayers that you have to do that you're planning on issuing into bonds. So that notice will now trigger this 10-day period for taxpayers to file a petition with the department. We will receive that petition and evaluate it, and within 30 days we have to provide you with a final determination on whether or not we feel that the project was divided. And if we do determine that the unit divided the project, what should have been a controlled project, they've divided it to avoid petition, remonstrance, or referendum, then once we determine that, yes, that's what they did, the unit will automatically have to move into petition, remonstrance, or referendum. Even if they had not originally headed that direction, our order will actually require them to move into that process. All right. Next, then, I wanted to jump over to 1450. 1450 was our DLGF agency bill, though if you watched all the evolution of this bill throughout the session, it went from a lot of just cleanup type items provided by the DLGF to the big Christmas tree bill, let's pile in everything pertaining to local government. So I'm going to highlight some of the things that were specific to DLGF, especially some of the things that we asked for that you all need to be aware of. But there are other things that are within 1450. It's a fairly lengthy bill, and just some of those are either unit specific or just maybe perhaps pertain more to a different local official. All right, so first and foremost is the contract upload. And I know this is something you all have heard us talking about for a while now. The contract upload provision actually came out of the 2016 legislative session originally, and it was to start to be implemented July 1st of 2016. As many of you know, we had gone through a process to design what that upload would look like on Gateway, and really right before we pulled the trigger, we said, based on the statutory language, there was a lot of work that had to be done by local units, and so we wanted to pull back and make sure that, at least from a technology standpoint, that upload process was as easy as possible for you all. So we pulled back, and we had been reworking the contract upload. Then we started to get towards the end of 2016 and really getting it to that point again where we felt like, okay, we could possibly move forward with this. And then we started to hear, okay, well, there may be some legislative changes coming with this particular upload. And so we at that point decided it was not in our best interest to release this, knowing that there may be some additional legislative changes coming. So 1450 actually contains those legislative changes. And one of the biggest changes is that it removed one of the two requirements for the contract upload. The original language said you had to upload any contract that was at least 10% of your levy, which was confusing since oftentimes those contracts can extend over a number of years. There were a lot of questions we were receiving about how would you do that calculation. Or the second threshold was if the contract itself is $50,000 or more. Not so much for you all, but a common complaint we were hearing from schools is that they have individual contracts with each employee, especially their teachers. So as you're looking at even just a mid-sized school corporation, that's 600 plus contracts right there that would have to be uploaded onto Gateway. So the decision was made that we needed to dial back on that a little bit. And so under the new legislation now, you're just looking at contracts where the term exceeds $50,000 throughout the term of the contract. Now, I know sometimes that contract automatically, from the day you sign it, says $50,000 or more. Other times, your contract may be designed to be a per-hour type contract or something along those lines, to where you don't really know that final amount on the day that you sign it. Statute provides for that and basically says if at some point during that contract period you do identify that you are now at $50,000 or more, you have 60 days to go ahead and upload that contract, even though it's past when you originally executed it. For those that were automatically $50,000 or more, you're asked to upload those within 60 days of execution. And then language was added in that said that you may specifically redact or obscure signatures on the contracts. That was another concern that people had. So you are able to do that. It is the unit's responsibility to do whatever redaction is necessary. So if there's confidential information on there, it is up to you all to go through that process and either redact or obscure that information before uploading it to Gateway. Now that we have this situation cleared up, you're going to see that we are coming back to that contract upload, and you're going to start to see more from us. And we're targeting to get that released within the next month so that we can look at July 1 and say, okay, here it is, it's ready to go, and everybody can start to actually do their uploads. All right. For the homestead deduction, and actually for a number of deductions here, we made some changes to clarify some situations that we were seeing. This, I will say, this is where I really wish we had Mike with us still. He's, as you all know, he's the deduction exemption rock star, to where I've never really had to learn all of these rules. But be that as it may, what we did here was basically if you have a change in your status, so specifically here we're talking about an unmarried individual who has a homestead deduction who now gets married and still wants to claim that homestead deduction and is still eligible for that homestead deduction on that property, that person must reapply for the homestead deduction. There's been some back and forth along the way as to whether or not that was really necessary, but because they did have a change in their marital status, and because your homestead deductions are tied together as husband and wife, these individuals will need to refile that homestead deduction. Similarly, we look the other way. If someone was married, having a homestead deduction, and now has divorced, but they want to continue to receive that homestead deduction, they also will need to come in and refile that application. Looking at the over 65, both over 65 deduction and credit. This top one does not necessarily pertain to marriage, but it's an individual who's receiving the over 65 deduction and now they are jointly owning the property, but they still want to continue to receive that over 65 deduction, they're going to have to come back in and reapply for it. And if an unmarried person is receiving an over 65 credit, this is the property tax credit, and now they've married and they want to continue to receive that credit, they also must come back in and reapply and go through all of the verification process for their income. Also pertaining to the homestead deduction, we added in a new option, which is the last bullet point here, again to address the situation where someone, typically for religious reasons, does not have an identifying number, whether that be that they don't have a social security number, they don't have a driver's license number, they don't have a state ID number. There is now an option to utilize a number that was obtained through the IRS, because even though that person may not want a permanent number associated with them, the IRS is going to tack a number onto them, and so they now can also use that number for helping to file their homestead deduction. All right. For the mortgage deduction, if a person has been receiving a mortgage deduction and now they refinance their property and they still want to receive that deduction, they do have to go ahead and again reapply for that deduction in the following year. So this has been an ongoing question as well, and so we just wanted to specifically get that clarified in statute that yes, a refinance does require you to reapply. So Hamilton County, if you're here, I'll be coming to you soon. All right, termination of the deductions. This is a new requirement for county auditors, but looking to be taxpayer friendly in this process. Before you as a county auditor may terminate a deduction, you do have to provide written notice to the person who is claiming that deduction, and you have to tell them that you intend to terminate that deduction and state the reason why. We see quite often, we get a lot of phone calls from taxpayers of, I used to have this, I don't have it anymore, and I don't know why. So we're just trying to be more proactive and address that situation up front. In terms of the notice itself, you may either send that notice via mail or via email. We certainly understand this isn't going to catch all of these situations, because even if you're sending it by mail, there are people who don't read their mail, there are people who don't read their email. But we are hopeful that this will at least provide more taxpayers with that opportunity to know what's happening and respond prior to you all actually implementing this change in deduction. As it pertains to penalties, there was a provision added in 1450 that allows the county treasurer and the county auditor to implement a policy through which you can waive, negotiate, or settle any penalties that have accrued on delinquent property taxes. That policy does have to be approved by your fiscal body before you can actually implement it. If you have this policy, then a negotiated agreement or settlement has to be in writing. It does have to be signed by your county treasurer, you as county auditor, and the taxpayer or the taxpayer's authorized representative. And then the county auditor does have to provide a copy of that written agreement to the taxpayer or the taxpayer's representative. For those counties where penalties are being waived, you do have to document that action to the department, and so we will be working to determine how we should go about doing that and what the easiest process is for you to notify us of that action. Certainly if you have suggestions based on your workflow, if you can say to us, hey, a form or an online system, or if it looked like this, that would be great. We would certainly welcome those comments. Likewise, with this documentation, while you do have to provide it to the department, statute also specifically says that you need to have it on hand for State Board of Accounts when they come in to audit you, if they request that information. All right. Cumulative funds. This is technically a statutory change, but realistically, it's really just codifying what we have already done, what we have been doing for several years, and I think what most people generally know and accept. So with your cumulative funds, as you know, when you originally establish your cumulative fund, you come to us and you say, we want to establish a cumulative fund in 0.0333 cents. And ultimately, our initial order, assuming we approve it, would say your cumulative fund is now established in that amount. Over time, however, that rate is going to be decreasing for a number of different reasons. One of which would be that locally you've determined we don't need to take that full amount. So you adopt something lower than that initially approved amount. And because you've adopted something lower, that then provides a threshold or a ceiling for what we can actually certify. The other way that this rate is going to start to trend downward is through that calculation that you'll see in your 1782 notice, excuse me, where we look at your assessed value over the last 4 or 5 years, and we do a different calculation that says, okay, if your assessed value has been trending upward, then the calculation is designed to trend your tax rate down from the standpoint of saying you can still receive the same amount of money with a lesser tax rate because you now have a higher AV. The formula that you see there, that kind of 8-step formula that's in your 1782 notice, it will never trend up. It will always just trend down. So just be aware of that. But that trending process forms what we call the rate cap. And so when we are looking at this, that rate cap is another ceiling that we are going to look at when we are looking to certify your cumulative fund tax rate. So really we look at 3 different rate caps, or 3 different ceilings: what you adopted, what you advertised. This is my it's time to stop talking soon. What you adopted, what you advertised, and then what that calculated rate cap is. So what the change that pertains here is, many of you know, if you have gone through the process in the past to reduce your cumulative fund voluntarily, or if you've had that trending, many of you know you come back in and you reestablish your fund to take it back up to, say, that original 0.0333. We have had some comments from people that have said, wait, no, I really shouldn't have to do that if I specifically chose not to take that full amount. However, the way that we have historically implemented this is, once that rate drops, you do have to do a reestablishment. So this codifies that practice and basically says, if we have certified for you a rate that's less than that initially ordered rate for any reason, whether it's because you chose that or because it got trended down, and now you want to take a rate that's greater than that, you have to come back and do the reestablishment process. So just be aware of that. And so I am actually, given the time frame, I am going to stop here. I have one more bill that I actually want to cover with you all, and it's 1129, but it pertains to local income taxes. So I'm going to leave a big cliffhanger out here for you all. Encourage you to be back tomorrow for our lit and TIF discussion. And we'll cover the changes from 1129 tomorrow afternoon during that roundtable. So thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.